we've had a fair few talks now on this theme, and we're looking at the Bodhisattva ideal. So that's our way of framing the Bodhisattva ideal, the way to the beyond for the benefit of all. So we're looking at how we can cultivate wisdom and compassion with an altruistic attitude. How can we benefit others in our quest to understand the Buddhist teachings? And when we're putting them into practice, how can that benefit ourselves and other people? So this is known as the Bodhisattva ideal. And a Bodhisattva is a being whose whole life is dedicated to awakening, to realising the truth of the Buddhist teachings. A Bodhisattva is dedicated to acting in accordance with the Buddhist teachings. And they are also dedicated to helping others to do that alongside them. That's as important to them as their own awakening, is the awakening of other people. And we've taken the Bodhisattva as our guide in this theme. So we have these for sale down in the bookshop, the Bodhisattva, a guide to the Buddhist path to awakening by Kshanti, who's an 8th century Indian monk. And he wrote this when he was residing at Nalanda University, which is this huge ancient university in India for Buddhist monks. So yeah, he wrote it, and it explains and rejoices in the Bodhisattva ideal, and he expounds on the need to practice what are known as the paramitas. So this is how a Bodhisattva practices, is by living in accordance with the paramitas. And here is the full list, the 10, and we're going to go through these during our theme. So we've already looked at generosity, or dana, and ethics, or shila, and they were the first two. Paramita means perfection, so we're looking to perfect these. We're trying to perfect our generosity and our ethical conduct. And now we're moving on to look at forbearance, or in Pali, Kshanti. So I'm going to be talking about Kshanti all evening. You'll be pleased to hear. So what is Kshanti, and why does it come next in the list of paramitas? So according to Shantideva, there's no spiritual practice equal to Kshanti. And without it, all our generosity and good conduct would be destroyed. So here we are trying to develop dana and shila, but if we don't have Kshanti, then whatever it is that we've been trying to cultivate is just kind of wiped to the floor again. So we have something here in Kshanti that protects our practice of generosity and ethics. But what is it? So in English, we've written forbearance up there. That's one of the definitions of Kshanti. Another one is patience. So patience, forbearance, or even both together, patient, forbearance, just to make sure. So we could define that as putting up with or withstanding difficulty or suffering, not letting painful situations overwhelm us or affect us too strongly, or just not getting angry or righteous about difficult situations. So my slightly more youthful definition that I came up with yesterday when I was talking to Emma here, my friend, she was saying, what is Kshanti? And I said, well, it's kind of just like being alright with stuff. That's my other definition. Being alright with stuff, really. We had a few more just now, didn't we, down there? I can't remember what they were now.
Don't sweat the small stuff.
Yes, don't sweat the small stuff, and it's all small stuff. There's another modern one we came up with. But the problem with all these definitions, these English words, is you could hear them all as implying that you have to become kind of passive or a bit have apathy in the face of adversity or painful experience. And this is misleading because that's not what Kshanti is asking us to do. That's not the meaning of Kshanti. So to understand what that term really is, to find out kind of more the subtle meaning of it, it can help to look at what Kshanti isn't. So what's the far enemy, what we call the far enemy of Kshanti, what isn't Kshanti? And also the near enemies of Kshanti, what might look like Kshanti but actually isn't. So what might look like forbearance but could actually be something that it's not quite. Okay, so, sorry, Thomas, I'm making this a bit difficult. So, a far enemy. So this is the complete opposite of Kshanti. So if things don't go the way we want or expect them to, we might complain or moan, we might become really overwhelmed, really despondent, or we might be just completely debilitated by the adversity and just kind of, just completely overwhelmed. Or we might get really, really angry. So that's the far enemy, that's what Kshanti isn't. And the near enemies, the things that might look like Kshanti, that aren't. And there's a few of these. So I've already mentioned apathy. So this would be just not caring, just being a bit aloof, being indifferent. There might be a response, but we're not going to kind of own up to it or even know that it's there necessarily because we're just quite aloof and indifferent. So that's not Kshanti. Passivity. This is when we might not act or respond to a situation, when actually there could be something really positive that we could do to change that situation. So passivity would just be letting anything happen, when actually there might be a way that we could encourage something more creative or more helpful to us to happen. So we need to be able to see when we can make changes, but also we can accept when we can't make changes. And this is quite subtle and can be quite challenging. But Shantideva says, if there is a solution, what is the point of dejection? Or what is the point of dejection if there is no solution? And this is very much like another really well-known phrase, a modern phrase or prayer that gets used in the Christian tradition. It also gets used in 12-step programs, which probably a lot of you have heard. So I'll just say it because it's kind of within the same region, which is grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So again, this is helping us not to be passive. There are some things that sometimes we can do to make situations better for ourselves. So we're not saying that we just need to just sit completely loose to everything that's happening around us. Nor are we looking to become submissive. So being submissive might be always giving way to other people and not speaking up for what we might prefer or need. And this would be not asserting ourselves, when again, sometimes there might be a reason to assert ourselves. It's really, really important to stress that Kshanti isn't about being a doormat. We're always aiming as Buddhists, if we want to live ethically, to be kind and to be truthful, so we can come back to our ethical conduct in order to try to help things happen in a way that is helpful to us and not be submissive to the other people, to other people's needs all the time. So they're the near enemies of Kshanti: apathy, passivity, submissiveness, and that's not what we want to be doing. So sometimes by looking at what we're not doing, we might approach a more whole understanding of what Kshanti is. I've looked into the English definitions, so we've got patience, we've got forbearance. I've looked into what those words really mean, because sometimes I find that can be helpful when I'm kind of trying to understand a word that's from ancient Indian language, and I've got these English words, but they don't necessarily match up. Sometimes I find going closer or more fully into the definitions of the English can help. So in patience, the word came about in 1200. I found this interesting: the quality of being willing to bear adversities, a calm endurance of misfortune or suffering. I think that's important. So when we're willing to bear adversity, so we've made a conscious choice that this adversity is something that we can bear or that we need to bear. But we're not always bearing things unquestioningly. And calm endurance, so this is more like an attitude really. So we might have an awareness of our response, and we might understand what, if anything, can be done in any situation. So we might communicate truthfully to somebody, we might give something time, or we might just try and understand what's going on and why it's not really what we want to be happening. And we might do all of that calmly, we might have an attitude of calm, but we're aware of what reactions or responses we have, and we're choosing what to do with those. And the Latin, patientem, I can't speak Latin, I don't know if that's how you say it, but it's bearing, supporting and enduring, but it's also firm and unyielding. So again, there's not this sense of kind of just completely always backing off. We're standing quite firm in the situation, in our response, but we're remaining calm. And forbearance means a refraining from. So again, we might be refraining from expressing anger or refraining from acting from this strong response to something. But that doesn't mean that we're going to choose to put up with or indulge the behaviour of another person if it's not something that we are willing to do. So yeah, I hope that's clear. So we're refraining from a particular kind of reactivity, but we're not kind of just standing completely back, and we are engaged in our lives, we're engaged with other people, and we're able to respond to situations. And later in the series, we're going to be looking more closely at how Kshanti helps us in our experience of expression of anger. And this is often quite a hot topic for people, and one that it's important to talk about. But I'm not going to look at that in this talk, because it's something that we're going to look at in a couple of weeks. So I'm going to explore some different areas. But yes, it is important. And Shantideva has a lot to say about anger, so do come back for that. So with all that I've said in mind, with the near enemies and with these English definitions, I'm going to define Kshanti as the practice of making an effort to maintain our equanimity whatever happens, even in apparently adverse situations. And this is an active practice. And equanimity, that word, means to have an even or level mind or spirit, so we can remain calm, applying goodwill and kindness even in adverse situations. And this is Kshanti. Okay, so a bit later on in this talk, I'm going to come back to how we might actively cultivate Kshanti or develop it. But for now, I want to explore what might happen in our lives that will usually upset us or get in the way of us having Kshanti, because it's not always there. So let's have a look at that. So in the Bodhisattva, Shantideva includes verses that relate to Buddhist teachings, to some of the Buddhist teachings, and these are related to the 8 worldly winds. So I'm going to reveal them now. Okay, so 8 worldly winds. So we have a happy face here and a sad face there. So you might get the idea already. So these winds are the way in which we're usually buffeted about by circumstance, by things in the world. And so therefore they can represent how or why we often lose equanimity and calm. I'm aware that some of you at the back might need to peer up to see these, so I'll read them out in case you can't see them. So the 8 worldly winds are pleasure and pain, gain and loss, praise and blame, fame or status, and obscurity. So things that we might be quite happy about, things that we might be quite unhappy about. And these winds are at play all the time in our lives. Different things happen, some things we want to happen, some things we don't want to happen. And if we're not aware of them, we can be really quite blown around by these winds. So the first one, pleasure or pain, you might notice how minor comforts or discomforts can affect your mood. I know that they affect my mood. So the weather or the temperature, what there is to eat, the traffic while we're driving, or when I walk up, even just a short walk from my home to the centre, I can get to the main road and the traffic's going by and I can find it quite unpleasant. So yeah, that can affect my mood. There's all sorts of examples I could give there. So that's when our kind of mind or body experiences pleasure or experiences pain. Gain and loss. So gain is when we really want to acquire things. We want things to be ours, like I want that new gadget to be mine, or I want those clothes, or I want whatever it is that you want. And it can get a bit kind of me versus you. It's like, well, I want to have that. I don't really know about you in that situation. I just am focused on what I can gain in the situation. And you might get upset if the things we own break or if we lose out somehow. So praise and blame, this is when our confidence or our self-view can inflate or deflate on the basis of what people say about us, or about the things that we do or how we are. So this is when we base our mood on how we consider other people's view of us to be. And fame and status or obscurity, so this is around popularity, being liked by a group, wanting to be known. We might like other people because they seem to be quite popular, and we think, oh, if we kind of get in with them, we'll be popular too. And of course we have a healthy desire to be well regarded, we want to have friendships, but this is kind of the bit that goes a bit beyond that, you know, when you're really bothered about how many likes you've got on Facebook and how many friends you've got on Facebook. That kind of thing. And I thought there's that quote in there, the only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about. I don't know who said that, but this is in that one. Who was it?
Oscar Wilde.
Was it Oscar Wilde? Yeah. Yeah, so we often base our happiness on these worldly wins. We feel really strong and confident when things are going well, but complain or feel weak, upset or angry when they're not. And I can often think that I'm quite aware that things are always changing, that these things don't really matter, that I'm not really in control. But when these winds are blowing, I find I'm very, very much affected and governed by them. Actually, my mood is very affected by these things. And that's just true. So, I'm going to look at the drawbacks of basing our happiness on these worldly winds. I'm going to look at what Shantideva has to say about them in the Bodhisattva. And I'm going to look at what might help us to cultivate Shanti within each one. So, there's some overlap, but there are also different worldly winds. So for pleasure and pain, Shantideva says, cold, heat, rain and wind, journeying and sickness. One should not be too squeamish about them, otherwise the distress becomes worse. So we've had quite a lot of rain, haven't we, recently? So if our happiness depends on getting pleasure and avoiding discomfort, then reactive cycles will set in. We'll become really addicted and clingy to the things that bring us pleasure, and we'll just want more of those. We'll become really unable to withstand the slightest discomfort. And both of those responses will make us very unhappy. We won't be creative, we won't be free, we'll just be going around quite reactively based on pleasure and pain. We'll be ruled by the Vedana that we experience. So we look at this in the introductory course. We have contact with something in the world, pleasant or painful, Vedana arises. And if we just go on that all the time, we'll just be we'll be reacting. And our lives will become very habitual. We'll be merely acting on autopilot. So we have a really well-known teaching that helps us here to remember the gap. So we have the gap in the introductory course. If we can use mindfulness to note what our initial feelings upon contact with the world are, and we don't reactively grab, cling to what is pleasurable, or push away what's painful, then we can have a creative response. So if I'm walking up the road to the busy road and the traffic noise, if I can just be aware that I don't really like the traffic noise, but that's okay, and just notice something else around me, and just hold that, then I can walk up to the centre without getting kind of like about the traffic, and I arrive at the centre in a much more friendly way. So, and as Shantideva warns, our distress will become worse if we're reactive, if we're basing our happiness on pleasure or pain. We'll just be in a cyclical state. So to maintain Shanti around pleasure and pain, we can cultivate awareness and mindfulness and try to act in the gap. So the second one, if we base our whole lives on gain and loss, if we base our happiness on gain and loss, then we'll become totally dependent on material things. And we know that material things don't bring satisfaction. They're unable to meet the longing which drives our craving for them. So Shantideva says, though I may acquire many possessions, I shall go empty-handed and naked. If that for which I live comes to nothing, what is the point of living, performing only unlovely deeds? So our lives are impermanent, and all that we might gain is impermanent. And this quote from Shantideva asks us to see that if we are acting unskillfully in order to ensure personal gain, then we are wasting the opportunity that our human life can represent. We have a precious opportunity to live, to cultivate happiness outside of material gain. So if we can develop Shanti in respect to gain and loss, we may become more content and happy. So how much more content and happy could our lives become? And also how much more generously might we act if we're not all about what we can get for ourselves? My numbers have gone funny. But I'm on to number 3, praise and blame. So if we're always seeking the approval of others and avoid the disapproval or blame that others might bring, we'll always be acting based on our assessment of what other people's needs or wishes are. We'll be dependent on other people's agendas, and we'll be unable to act independent of those agendas. Shantideva says, "We feel delighted when anyone praises us, and pained when anybody criticises us, which is simply the absurd behaviour of a child." It can be quite strong, Shantideva, who doesn't mince his words. So how about we become more truthful in the face of what others may praise or criticise us for? So it's all too easy to sidestep blame or look for another scapegoat so that we don't get the blame. We might defend ourselves, point out that it wasn't us, actually it was their idea, or they did that. So we could refrain from doing that and just see what it's like to accept blame sometimes and see kind of how bad it really is. So a lot can be said for being honest if we haven't been able to do the chore that we said we would do, or we haven't quite started that report that's due in next week. Knowing that somebody else might have wanted us to do that, can we just be honest about what we've been able to do or not do? So becoming more truthful in this way and standing strong in the face of the potential blame, we might find we can be more confident and grounded in our own experience of ourselves, and less dependent on what others think of us. So this would help us to maintain Kshanti in the face of praise or blame. I've got a really, what I found quite a strong example. I was on a retreat once, and I was probably the youngest person on this retreat, and I was sitting eating next to probably the oldest person on that retreat. I think this lady is in her 80s now, and this was not that long ago, probably 6 or 7 years ago. And we were just eating our lunch, and she spilled a big glass of water all over the table, and it went over other people's food and things. So obviously she was embarrassed. And she just said, "Oh, I feel so embarrassed." And it was really, I don't know, to me, it was just really clear. Like, I probably would have been like, "Oh, gosh," and rushed off to clear something up, and then for the rest of the day kind of worried that what people thought of me, and would not have had Kshanti. But she was just able to just say, "Oh, I feel really embarrassed," and then probably just let that go then for the rest of the day. So just allowing for our feelings when we do something that we might think we might be criticised for, and just naming them. So next one, fame and status or obscurity. So it's similar to praise and blame, but this is when we're basing our happiness and strength purely on what others in a particular group might think of us. So, quite how many people might like us, and possibly whether our views tally with the majority or not. So if we're basing our happiness or our strength on this, we'll just go along with the crowd, for fear of being left behind or falling into an anonymity because we're a little bit different. If we do realise that we think differently or want to act differently to others, we won't dare to express ourselves. And if we start to act differently, we might feel like we're missing out as a result of that. And we might feel really upset and isolated and really just want to get back in with the crowd. Again, at school and memory from a long time ago, I'd just pretend to like music that I didn't like so that the popular people would accept me. It's very, very difficult to stand outside of that popular group in a big school that was quite cliquey. So if we're basing our happiness on having status, then we won't be ourselves. And then if we do experience renown and status for a while, however long it lasts, we might feel quite invincible about that. We're in the in crowd, everything's going really well. We might become complacent as well. Maybe we'll just think, "Oh, we're in now, we don't really have to try to do anything in particular because we just surf on our fame." And complacency is dangerous. So Shantideva says, "When our reputation or status is attacked, our mind howls like a child whose sandcastle has been knocked down. But the chains of reputation and status have no place on someone who is looking for liberation. So are we? Are we looking for liberation? So yeah, it's really important that we can develop individuality in respect to what we perceive the majority to want. If we can be authentic and express ourselves authentically, we might find that the strength and purpose that can come from this is much greater than the apparent but quite fragile happiness that comes from dependence on a group. So yeah, if we can do that, it will enable us to maintain Kshanti regardless of the popularity of our views or behaviours. So they're the 8 worldly winds, and what we can do about them. It's challenging, but it's possible. So we've looked at them each in turn and seen how we can develop Kshanti in regards to each one. And as I've said, it's really helpful if we can become aware of these worldly winds, just name them, name how they affect us, bring mindfulness and understanding to our behaviour in response to them. And if we can do that, we'll find ways to maintain equanimity through adversity and good fortune. So now I'm going to suggest a few more ways to develop Kshanti as a whole, and what Kshanti might look like as an active practice. So firstly, we can develop positive states of mind. It's great, isn't it? I think that was quite a surprise when I first came to the Buddhist Centre. That aren't dependent on outer circumstances. So this might be through the cultivation of metta, in the metta bhavana meditation, in our relationships. We might find appreciation and pleasure in friendship, or in meditation, or in simple activities like time in nature, or exercise. Personally, I prefer gentle exercise, but it's up to you. Maybe a creative project, maybe we might learn something creative, or paint something, knit something. We might appreciate the arts, we might go to galleries, or musical or concerts. So yes, we can develop appreciation and positive states of mind that's not dependent on how things are out there in the world, just simple enjoyment of simple things. Another way to develop Kshanti might be to take on challenges. So these challenges might be things that we might initially find difficult, or that might take us out of our comfort zone. So this might be hill walking, marathon running, maybe volunteering in different areas. You could volunteer here at the Buddhist Centre. You could clean with Tanzil on a Tuesday. You could help out at an introductory course. We've got one coming up in September. So by daring to take on new challenges, we find that we can withstand more than we might expect. So I used to be extremely shy in public situations. And I can remember first walking into the hall for the introductory course and being really scared, and my heart beating and my throat kind of tightening up, even just talking in a small group in an introductory course. So I would never have thought it was possible to do public speaking. But the confidence that I have now, I seem to be doing it right now. So yeah, the confidence has come from gradually challenging myself. So in interactions with other people, out in the world, in public, here in the Sangha, and helping out here at the centre. So yeah, you can gradually change your view of yourself, of what you can withstand, and find that you can withstand a lot more than you thought by putting ourselves out of our comfort zones. I still am shy occasionally. If you ever see me being shy. Not always, though. So yeah, another way to develop Kshanti, we might bring more conscious awareness to our temptation to complain or blame other people, or just blame things when they're not going so well for us. So this can be quite a tendency to moan and complain. But instead we might choose to put up with minor discomforts or inconveniences. We might choose to just let them happen, like the rain or the cold, without complaining, and instead rest our attention on the enjoyable elements in our experience. So if it is raining, maybe we could notice the beautiful jewel-like droplets of water that hang from every leaf, branch or spiderweb. So often there is something to enjoy in all situations. Once I left a really mouldy banana in my bag for a while. Well, it wasn't mouldy at first, it got mouldy. And I can remember turning my bag inside out and scrubbing it. And I was outside, it was sunny, I think. But I was really enjoying cleaning this kind of nasty bit of banana out of my bag. It sounds a bit weird, and I can't even say exactly why. Yeah, not all situations that you think are going to be uncomfortable are. Maybe it was because I was outside, and it was just, maybe it was a kind of mindful kind of, I don't know, continued act of scrubbing or something. I don't know, anyway. There you go. So rest your attention on the enjoyable elements in your experience, and try not just to bend the straw. You had this teaching of bending the straw. The straw might be quite on this side and complaining and blaming, and maybe we could just try not to do that for a bit and see what happens. So my final suggestion for cultivating or practicing Kshanti, this one comes with a story. I won't tell it quite yet, but it does come with a story. So I want to talk about or touch on how difficult it can be to maintain Kshanti in the face of pain, of our own pain, but also the pain that arises when we see other people suffering. So going back really to the first worldly wind, pleasure and pain. But what happens if it is really quite strong pain in ourselves or in other people that we love? Like what happens then? How can we maintain Kshanti? And I sometimes find that very difficult. I find it very difficult to maintain Kshanti when I see people I love suffering. I can often feel overwhelmed by their pain and by my own pain in response to theirs. So it might be people that I've known for a long time, people in my family, or it might just be people that I've just met but that I care about. I can start to think that I should be able to do something to help this person, or that it's just simply awful that whatever is happening, and that it really shouldn't be happening. But something must be done somehow to take that pain away. So a good friend of mine, Moksatara, who's going to be speaking here in a couple of weeks, who used to teach here in Sheffield, once told me this story from the Buddha's time that really helped me to understand what to do when I had this overwhelmed response to suffering. So here's the story. So the Buddha was once living in an area where there was a known and greatly feared vagrant known as Angulimala. So Angulimala means finger necklace. And he was so called because he was wearing the fingers of the people he'd murdered around his neck as a necklace. Bit scary. And the locals warned the Buddha about Angulimala. They said, best not walk through that bit of the forest. Angulimala's there, and you probably just don't want to come up and face him. So he's laying in ambush in that bit of forest. He's looking for another finger. Just go around the forest. But the Buddha remained fearless and calm, hearing these stories. He took no heed of their warnings and mindfully went about his way along the forest path. Angulimala saw the Buddha and thought, another finger. And he approached the Buddha. He ran after the Buddha, but he found he was unable to catch up with him. He was so impressed by the Buddha's words and attitude that he decided to renounce his murderous ways. So he went up, but the Buddha was so calm, so fearless, and so clear when he said what he said to Angulimala about renouncing hurting or harming others, that Angulimala decided to renounce hurting and harming others, and he went forth. He asked to go forth under the Buddha's guidance, and he became a monk. So later, after Angulimala had been living as a monk for a while, he was walking through a local village, and he was recognised. All those who had lost their dear relatives because of Angulimala's violence saw him and retaliated. They threw stones and clods of earth, striking him with sticks, shouting abuse. So, not a pretty sight. When Angulimala returned to the Buddha, his robes were torn and bloodied. He was probably looking quite dejected and in quite a lot of pain. And the Buddha saw Angulimala and he said, "Bear it, brother, bear it." So simply that. Bear it, brother, bear it. So this story and the Buddha's words have often helped me with my own response to pain and suffering. So the pain that I experience myself, or the pain that I see a loved one experience. And I find it helpful to reflect that there are many interdependent conditions that contribute to all of our experiences, many of which we did not have the option to change in the past, or we might not have had the awareness to act differently. So we ourselves, we're not fixed or independent of conditions, and we've made many choices in the past that will condition our experience of here and now. So it isn't possible to change what's happened in the past, and perhaps more importantly, neither is it possible to remove or to rescue ourselves or other people from the consequences of our past actions. So the Buddha didn't go running up to the villagers to tell them off, to reprimand them, and he didn't expect those people to respect Angulimala, even though he was now living as a monk and was living skillfully now. He just asked Angulimala to bear that suffering. So if I experience suffering now, all I can do is respond to it now as kindly and compassionately as I can. So I can bring kindly awareness to it and perhaps see that there's nobody to blame, not even myself. And blame is another one of these worldly whims. So this kind of reflection, it's helped me to withstand and allow for pain and suffering, and helps me to stand with it, or at least alongside it, without getting as overwhelmed. So again, reflecting on the story and on these words, it helps me to be there for others with kindness and love if they are suffering, rather than thinking I can somehow take it away. And suffering really is to be expected in this human world. These winds will blow, and sometimes quite strongly. So constantly applying effort in this area is a definition of a strong and active practice of Kshanti, I believe. So, to end with, I'm going to read the last verse in the chapter of Kshanti in the Bodhisattva. Serenity, freedom, joy and long life, the happiness of an emperor, prosperity, these the patient person receives while continuing in cyclic existence.